Welcome to the Holborn Assets channel. In this series, we look at major events in the history of economics that help to shape the world we live in today. We only cover 3 events a week, so there's plenty of history we can't look at, but if you think of a big one we missed, just leave a comment and we'll look at it for future videos. We also welcome any suggestion for economic or personal finance topics you'd love to know more about. After Please Please Me was released on the 22nd of March 1963, it stayed on top of the UK charts for 30 weeks, only finally being replaced by the next album by the Beatles. The 60s were a huge turning point in the history of the music industry. For thousands of years, the only business around music would have been the production of musical instruments, but even then, the market would have been relatively small. Once the printing press came into being, an industry appeared around the sale of sheet music. The composers were valued, and music publishers in the late 1800s could sell hundreds of copies of each work to various local orchestras. Edison's invention of the phonograph in 1877 allowed music to be both recorded and played, but the first few decades were a mess of competing formats. With all the size differences from 4, 5, 7.5, 10 and 12 inches, it was hard to create a big market. We eventually settled on the 12-inch as the album format, and the public's true love of recorded music really began after Les Paul created multi-track recording in 1948, meaning performances no longer needed to be taken live. The Beatles still lead the way as the world's most successful recorded artists, having sold almost 270 million albums. The 7 Years' War ran from 1754 to 1763, where the British and half of Europe battled against France and the other half of Europe. There was fighting in Europe, Africa and India, but most of the important territorial changes happened in North America. The British had won but needed money, so on the 22nd of March 1765 they passed the Stamp Act. It was a direct tax on the colonies they owned in America. Many printed documents like magazines, newspapers, playing cards and legal papers were supposed to have an embossed revenue stamp, paid and prepared in London. The colonials were obviously not delighted about this. They said in a democracy they shouldn't be forced to pay a tax to a government they had no say in. This gave us the famous slogan, "No taxation without representation." The law was repealed a year later, partly through pressure from British merchants trading in the colonies, who were also affected. But the damage was done, and it was one of the key factors that led to the Declaration of Independence. After the horrors of World War II, Europe realised that it needed to create stronger ties between the nations in order to prevent the endless wars that had been happening for thousands of years. The Treaty of Paris in 1951 was an agreement to share the production of coal and steel between France, West Germany, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. And then, on the 25th of March 1957, the Treaty of Rome was signed, creating the European Economic Community, which led to the European Union and the adoption of the euro. The first major step of the EEC was to set a common price for agricultural products. The community survived a difficult test. In the early stages, everything had to be agreed upon unanimously, but once the honeymoon period was over, a majority vote came into play. The French, under Charles de Gaulle, held out until it was agreed that each country could veto any decision that went against their national interest. There were various expansions of the EEC as more countries joined, and internal trade rules were relaxed. And finally, the EEC was replaced by the European Union in 1993. So, that was the week. Who knows what events from the last few days will end up being recorded in history as important events that changed the world. Don't forget to subscribe so you can learn more about the economic history of the world, as well as see other great videos on managing your money and making investments.